Hello, this is the ISDS 555 Group D8 project, written by
Gregory Gonzalez,
Timothy Liu,
THOM, VILLEGAS,
HOON Lee, YOSEF OSMAN.
Our report illustrates the impact of emissions of gaseous pollutants on the environment produced by different countries. There were 5 indicators taken from World Bank Indicators database and analyzed against different countries. The indicators used are alternative and nuclear energy, CO2 emissions from liquid fuel consumption, CO2 emissions from solid fuel consumption, and energy use of oil equivalent per capita, and fossil fuel energy consumption. It was hypothesized that the specific indicators directly correlated with a country's GDP. Each group member performed their analysis by answering questions about emissions indicators and comparing them with indicator data from different countries. The group members used database methodologies by creating a centralized database, normalized tables, and referential integrity between tables. After reviewing the results, there were some positive correlations between countries with higher GDP and CO2 liquid fuel consumption. This correlation can be attributed to countries with a high GDP being more developed and industrialized. On the other hand, some results did not produce a direct correlation as hypothesized. There was no clear correlation between GDP and energy use per capita and alternative and nuclear energy.
So a little introduction about our project. We will be looking into our 5 indicators through mandatory analysis questions and additional analysis. Emissions is generally a big topic in modern society today, and we use the data provided to gain further insight through in-depth analysis. Our insight will provide us with an understanding of factors correlating with emissions represented by different indicators.
So this is our physical ELG diagram that shows the tables in our database and the relationship between them. We have 6 tables: the continent, country, country 2, country data, and indicator. The relationship between continent, country is like 1 to many. Each continent can be in 1 or more continent country, and each continent country includes 1 and only 1, or must include 1 and only 1 continent. And the same thing between continent country and country 2. Each continent country must belong to one and only 1 country 2, and each country 2 could have 1 or more continent country. And the same exact relationship between continent country and country, and it goes the same thing for the other 2 tables. Next, please.
Here we'll begin our mandatory analysis.
So the first mandatory analysis is asking to find out if there's any country that is missing 1 or more indicators. So what we did, first of all, I made a subquery that returns the rows with the country names and indicator codes. Of course, the indicators, they should be related to our topic, which is emissions. And we count how many. I counted how many times the country repeated. So if they are repeated less than 5 times, which that says it's missing at least 1 or more indicators. So after running the query, we got the result on the left side. We have St. Lucia on the first, and we have a lot of island countries which are far from the mainlands.
Question 2 asks, list countries alphabetically by name for which data for all indicators exists. In the PDF report, but not the view, limit the results at most 10 rows. In order to produce a list, the select distinct name command was used for the country table and indicator code from the indicator table. Then the country data was interjoined and on the inner indicator code, and the country interjoined on the country code, where the indicator code is like and begins with the letters EG and EN, and you get the results on the table on the left. Next question.
So question 3, we're going to be listing the indicators with the name of the indicators with corresponding number of countries with data. And we're going to be looking this in a descending order. So what was done was we grabbed the indicator name or description from the indicator table, and we grabbed the number of countries by counting the name of the countries. So this is done by pulling from the country data table and interjoining with the indicator table and country table. Then we're setting up a where clause based on all the 5 indicators used, and we're ordering by the number of countries in a descending order. So in question 4, we're going to be looking at the top 10 countries in terms of the most recent value of one of the indicators. The indicator that was chosen was fossil fuel energy consumption. And in order to get the countries with the respective most recent date, we will be pulling data from the country data table and interjoining that onto the country table in order to get the country name. Then we'll be setting up a where clause with the indicator code of fossil fuel energy consumption, and then we'll be grouping it by country name and the dates. And in order to get the most recent, we'll be ordering by the date descending, and the top 10 will be limiting it by 10.
All right, for question number 5, we were asked to list all continents with the corresponding most recent average value compared to computed across countries with data for one of the indicators. And I chose the indicator of CO2 liquid emissions. So what I did for that is that I did a combination of joins on continent, country data, and an inner join with country code and a max date in order for us to determine the most recent date or most recent average values. The big thing was another group by and a where clause to distinguish our CO2 liquid average. And as you can see, Asia and North America have the highest average emissions most recently, and Europe has the least. This might just be the case because the United States and North America, where transportation for CO2 liquid is based in automobiles.
So for question number 6, it's asking us to create a table with 5 N indicators. So what I did, I created a view with 5 indicators and a date, and another table with USA values only. And I joined these 2 tables based on the date and indicator codes. And on the left side, you can see that all indicators, they are increasing over time. Just to remind you guys, 5 indicators, they include like CO2 emissions from solid fuel, liquid fuel, alternative and nuclear energy, fossil fuel energy consumption. All these values, they are increasing, as you can see in the table. Let's go to the next question.
Question 7 asks to pick one of the indicators and calculate the average percent of growth for each country for all years 2010 and earlier, and later. Round the average percent growth to 2 digits and order by the decreasing average percent of growth. To find this answer, 4 views were created to support the query. The first view, V countries 2010 and up, produced a list of countries that has indicator energy use for year 2009 and greater and its values. The second view, VC1, finds the previous date and value so that it can be compared with the current date and values to get growth. The view V growth finds the percent growth by dividing current value by the previous year value minus 1. Then view M7 rounds the average growth and orders by descending order to get the results on the table on the left.
Right, so for mandatory question number 8, use exists to find countries, use names which have 2011 data for any of your N indicators. What we did here, we used the nested query. So the subquery here basically lists all the country codes that have data for our indicators, and this is a unique way for finding the indicators. It's kind of lazy, but I mean, it does what it's supposed to do here. If you have more indicators, I think this would not work because, you know, there might be more matching indicators. However, it works for us. And then I'm also having the condition for 2011, and then I'm using exist from the nested query to list all of the country names as requested. And the total was there were 232 countries that have 2011 data for at least one of our indicators. Next.
All right, for question 9, we're supposed to find countries which have 2011 data for all of our N indicators, which would be our 5 emission indicators. And we are also asked to limit them for 10 rows. So what I did was I pretty much did multiple nested select statements, as well as an extraction from the date, alongside with more further nested select statements, where we match the indicator code has to be in a specific select statement, where I grabbed the 5 emissions indicators from our indicator table, and doing that limited it to needing to be in those 5 emissions indicators. And then through that group by country code having count, I made sure that we had all 5 of those emissions indicators in that country. So in this case, we see like countries like Australia and Argentina, who all have all 5 emissions, like CO2 emissions for liquid fuel, gas fuel, and alternative energy. Next, we have additional analysis.
So My additional question is asking if there's any relationship between national GDP and CO2 emissions from solid fuel. So it's very obvious that the table shows China and United States on the top. I ordered this table by average CO2. So China has the most CO2 emissions from the solid fuel consumption. United States comes to second, and India, Russia. But the thing is, China and United States, they are in charge of more than 30% of total consumption, total CO2 emissions from solid fuel. Okay, next.
Yeah, this question asks if is there a direct correlation between a country having a large GDP and having a high alternative and nuclear energy usage in a given year? We chose the year 2008 as an example and ordered just the top 25, highest to lowest in value. The question tries to determine if the country with a high GDP would have more resources to spend on alternative and nuclear energy research and development. The two views created tables for nuclear energy and GDP values for countries in the year 2008. The tables were interjoined to create the results below. The results were narrowed down to the top 25 countries with the highest value usage. As you can see, there is not really a direct correlation to the high GDP and alternative and nuclear energy use in the year 2008. Next slide.
So for the third question, we're going to be looking at percent change of fossil fuel energy consumption and percent change of passenger air transport. So we're trying to answer the question, does an increase in total passengers result in higher fossil fuel energy consumption? So we'll be looking at the years between 2010 and 2011 and calculating the percent change by subtracting the next year's data minus the initial year over the final year. So this was done by creating 4 different views, 2 of percent change of fossil fuel energy consumption of 2010, 2011, and 2 for percent change of total passengers from 2010 to 2011. And then after looking at the result, we can see a percent change between these years and of the respective countries. There seems to be a positive correlation between that of Congo, Dominican Republic, Tanzania, Sri Lanka, Georgia, and Zambia. However, there are outliers of the countries Gabon, and Japan. And after doing further research, the reduced in air travel from Gabon was due to a volcano eruption that had canceled all airlines, and Japan Airlines went bankrupt in the year 2010. Next slide.
So for question 4, for additional analysis, I decided to ask if there's a relationship between CO2 emissions from liquid fuel consumption with a country's national GDP in the year 2011. So to do this, I created 3 views to answer this question. The first view was to filter out all country data to make sure all the countries were the desired countries and had the exact same integrated code we wished. The second view, the GDP view, was meant to extract our GDP data for the year 2011, and then our last view was created to join the 2 views together and limit our top 10 countries on liquid fuel consumption. And from this, we look at the United States and the European Union have a relationship with liquid CO2 emissions and GDP, as both liquid emissions and GDP have a positive correlation, and this is due to how developed those 2 countries are, as the United States and the European Union, which is a combination of multiple European countries, are probably the most developed countries in the world and both have a high automobile culture.
Right, so for additional question 5, I came up with this question: is there a clear connection between the increase of energy use and GDP per capita in 2010? And here I'm only comparing the top 10 countries in energy use, right? So for this, I created 2 views. The first one, I'm listing all of the I'm listing all of the data for the indicator energy use, right, for the year 2010, and I'm exempting this country, Curacao, because this country does not really exist for this indicator, right? And then the second view, I am listing all of the data for the GDP per capita, and for the countries, I'm only I'm only listing the countries that exist in the first view, right? And also for the year 2010. And I'm ordering by descending because, as I said, we are comparing only the top 10 countries, and this is why also I'm limiting to 10 in both views. So the answer view, what I did, I joined both views together, and as we can see, even though the US was the 10th in energy use, but still it has the highest GDP per capita among the top 10 countries. So that tells us that there is no clear connection between the 2 indicators. Next.
So what we found was pretty obvious. United States and China, they release they use the most the CO they release most CO2 emissions, and countries with the higher usage of alternative energy, they tend to have lower CO2 emissions from the solid fuels or any form of traditional energy. And so yeah, it's our next 100 years is going to be depends on China and United States. Thank you.